What if Brexit gets cancelled?
If Brexit goes ahead, then Europe is going to be diminished as an entity. You're losing a large economy, you're losing a player of political weight, Europe's going to be weaker, but also Brexit should be the opportunity for Europe to deal with some of the fundamental issues that our own citizens all over Europe have with the European project. We should look at these issues and deal with them. And if we did that, we could find a way through, in my view, where Britain could stay, Europe could reform, and stay strong. And this is what we will need in the 21st century, especially when the rise of China is going to make the whole of the geopolitics of the 20th century different.
It's over. We answered a question and we got it wrong. Imagine the day the Prime Minister of the UK steps out of the doors of number 10 and tells the UK that we will remain inside the European Union after all. In my last video, I explored how, not because the British people voted for it, not because any particular party asked for it and won a large enough majority in Parliament, not even because Parliament itself particularly wanted to remain in the EU, but because they couldn't decide on a way of leaving. They'd have used the full force of political incompetency to do the biggest U-turn in history, not crashing out of the EU, but crashing straight back into it, pulling the plug on the most out-of-control political machine ever created. And stopping Brexit. The 1st of November 2019.
What they're actually trying to do is to form a coalition against the people. And if you think that the public are angry at Brexit not being delivered, this will make them furious.
For many, Brexit meant doing the impossible, defying the political establishment and winning. But that move in turn created a political monster that wrecked many political careers and frightened many businesses and top economists along the way. Ending Brexit would be like destroying newly created dinosaurs. Relief for those who fell victim to its might, such as EU citizens, the Irish, and anyone that relied on trade or border crossings, or anyone worried about the potential costs Brexit might have created.
Britain is not going to be able to have our cake and eat it. Right? We're not going to be able to be out of the single market and then replicate the same arrangements of the single market without its obligations. This is never going to happen. If Britain comes out of the single market and customs union, there's going to be a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, because it's then the border with the European Union. Likewise, if we allow freedom of movement across north and south, which I support, by the way, then how has Britain taken back control of its border? So what we will find is that when we come to try and resolve the Irish issue, we have exactly the same dilemma that we will have across the whole of the negotiation, which is once you decide not just to leave Europe's political structures, but its economic structures in the single market and customs union, you're going to have a hard border and a hard Brexit.
But for those who created Brexit, who slaved all their lives to fight for something better than uncontrolled immigration from the EU or a dictation of rules and rights from countries that we don't like, those people will be angry at all the unnecessary spending that went towards the lavish lifestyles of the European elites and Eastern European countries, whose migrants put immense pressure on UK institutions. Yes, it would discard a huge deal of legal paperwork and bureaucracy that would have been created as a result of leaving the EU, that would have made it harder to run businesses that relied on migration, such as hospitality, or businesses that relied on free trade, such as manufacturing. But at what cost to Britain?
We are aiming for a clean break Brexit. That is what people want. To leave the European Union, to leave the single market, to leave the customs union, the European Court of Justice, and to get on with the rest of our lives. That's our message. That's what we're campaigning on. We want democracy respected, and we want promises, repeated promises, to be kept.
As those both relieved and angry take to the streets, the divided United Kingdom would no longer be united. Not united in belief, not united by democracy, not even united by our government, as the Prime Minister, who I'm saying could be a weak Jeremy Corbyn, would have failed on a political scale as big as losing a world war. Now, Obviously, a world war is more violent and deadly than Brexit, but when you consider how Britain has killed and enslaved many around the world in an attempt to impose democracy, and then consider by how remaining in the EU, Britain would have effectively stamped a massive question mark on the ballot papers of 2016. It would question the democracy many around the world died for. Our Prime Minister would have to resign to allow a Prime Minister who believes in Remain Britain and who isn't tainted with incompetency to take office. So who is Prime Minister X? What future leader can possibly represent the people in a democracy when they or their colleagues chose to go against the wishes of a majority of leavers in 2016 to represent a digital or assumed majority of Remainers in 2019? Well, the answer is nobody, because while polling and online petitions might suggest more people support Remain, it would be the first time in history the real, organic, democratic human being population of a country are in a minority to digital accounts and pollsters. This idea that Russian interference created Brexit in the first place would start to be disbelieved, and trust in any argument found online or the mainstream media would be at an all-time low. In other words, you can't run a democracy when the leaders of the democracy invalidate the views of the majority. Don't forget, we're not saying that a second referendum gave a mandate for Parliament to vote to revoke Article 50, but that there was no other option that they could agree on. So despite wanting to draw a massive line under the embarrassment that was Brexit, the future Prime Minister will need to try again at giving any future government, including themselves, the mandate to stay inside the EU. Otherwise, the betrayal would snowball into a party backlash that would make the country ungovernable, as Brexiteers would refuse to work with Remainers who voted to revoke Article 50. And while the current or even future Parliament may have a majority of Remainers, they would soon turn against the government when it becomes apparent that the people want to have a say. This would make a huge headache for the Prime Minister in charge of the Parliament who voted to revoke Article 50. On the one hand, they could ignore the people, hope Brexit dies down, and concentrate on domestic political issues, such as the Labour promise of renationalising the railways, for example. But that would risk being seen as undemocratic on Brexit, not getting the support of the House with the coalition minority government, and not actually delivering those domestic policies you set out to achieve in the first place, leading to a no confidence vote and a possible huge loss at a future election. On the other hand, they could offer a second referendum, answer what the people want, and restore some trust in democracy.
If we can't get a sensible deal along the lines of our alternative plan or a general election, Labour backs the option of a public vote on it.
But that risks a huge backlash that means Leave winning again and carrying on the same chain of events that led to this mess in the first place. The incumbent Labour government would prefer a second referendum over a general election, which might mean that they lose power, which obviously an opposition would prefer a general election so that they could gain power. Of course, it might not really be up to the UK, but more so up to the EU, who would be pushing the UK for a decision.
I also give a very strong message to European leaders. They've also got to show leadership in this situation. I mean, the truth is that the anxieties that gave rise to Brexit in the UK could be replicated in any European country. It's just that we happen to have a referendum that was in or out of Europe.
They wouldn't want a disgruntled member with loads of Brexit Party MEPs sitting on their benches for much longer. So despite the decision by the UK Parliament, it might not be able to keep its status as a current EU member as it currently is for much longer, without, as demanded by the EU, a second referendum. Not to mention the numerous Supreme Court legal challenges that would likely come the government's way. But there might be a better way the Labour coalition with the SNP could solve the situation.
Friends, we gather here in Edinburgh, our beautiful capital city. Soon to be, we hope, and how good does this sound? The capital city of an independent Scotland.
It would be a way the SNP could deliver on their independence priorities for Scotland and keep the majority of Leave voters in England and Wales happy. And it would be a Scottish independence referendum, whereby if Scotland voted to leave the UK, they could remain in the EU. Perhaps this could also include Northern Ireland too, with an open border on all sides. Perhaps this could then be followed by a second EU referendum. This would give the majority of each of the nations the best of both worlds, but it would anger and isolate London, along with other Remain areas, should Scotland go independent. Scottish voters would have to second guess whether England and Wales would vote to leave the EU again, so it's more likely a second EU referendum would come before a Scottish one. But while a referendum or an election might restore democracy and help once and for all solve British Euroscepticism and trust in democracy, our Parliament has already proved it fails to make difficult, country-changing decisions. Our politicians prefer to change the little things and keep a relative status quo. But our voters, the people who live and work this land every day of their lives till their deaths, can see through this charade of party politics. For a politician, their aim is to keep their job. For a voter, their aim is to reap the benefits of their vote. I think it's clear to me that regardless of what happens with Brexit, whether we remain or leave, the UK will see significant permanent change within the coming years. Change such as the abolition of the House of Lords, the destruction of the two main political parties, the introduction of proportional representation, and the renationalisation of certain industries. And hopefully, that change leads to reform that puts the needs of individuals above the needs of businesses and the elites. Most importantly, this country has failed to notice and make change financially and politically. That change, regardless of our EU status, is coming. Hopefully that reform can be echoed in Europe, changing the EU forever. But when we're already in an age when algorithms affect our democracies so much, there will come a time when Britain develops not on what it wants or needs the most, but on what's recommended to it the most, and that will only serve those in power. The divisions of Leave and Remain, and even the left and the right of Europe, are going to develop into two distinct groups: those who support the establishment and those who are against. And if history tells us anything, it's that while these civil wars and revolutions get resolved, the questions that they created never get answered. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.